Gotta get that. Gotta get that. Gotta get that. Gotta get that.
Hello, my name is Zach King, and this project is on The Games by David Goldblatt. I found the book to be incredibly compelling and even more informative. I would say that I had no idea about 90% of the material in the book, which, in my opinion, always makes for a fascinating read. First and foremost, I appreciated the reading because it made me think. A recurring theme in this course has been what sports can be, what they can mean, what athletics can do outside of the game itself. Two major takeaways I had from this book dealt with gender inequality and race relations. Some troubling information was gathered while I read this book that reminded me very much of our last course reading, The Fall of the House of FIFA. And when I say that, I mean this in terms of gender inequality. For example, a thing I learned while reading The Fall of the House of FIFA, which I didn't know prior to reading the book, was that in English football, women's competitive play was straight up banned for nearly 50 years, which is a pretty troubling piece of history for the sport in general. And what I've come to learn while reading the games is that the Olympic Games has many skeletons in their closet as well when it comes to this issue. A relatively glaring example of a not so great moment for gender inequality in Olympic Games can be found if you study Fanny Cohen, who is a person who I was not familiar with before doing this research on the Olympics, and who is now a hero of mine, I consider. Fanny Cohen was a four-time gold medalist. She won 4 gold medals in 1948. She was a Dutch runner, a tremendous athlete, a great champion. After her wins in 48, she received death threats. She was publicly ridiculed. She received things in the mail because she was a female athlete. As Goldblatt teaches the reader, the man historically given credit for what we today think of as the Olympic Games or the modern day Olympics is a man named Pierre de Coubertin, and I'm sure I could pronounce that a lot better. Coubertin is given credit for moving away from the image of the ancient Grecian Olympics into a more modern day event, or what we typically think of as the Olympics. As Goldblatt describes it, Coubertin had a vision in his head that the Olympics would be a grand and glorious event that was not involving any political limitations. It was simply to be a celebration of athleticism and a large primetime event. However, the more I learned about some of the dimmer parts of the Olympics history, the more I started to question what Coubertin's vision really was. And the more I found the culture he created was relatively suspect in terms of equality. The more I thought about the Coubertinian image of the Olympic Games, I kept coming back to the Fanny Cohen situation. And as I pondered how horrible of a spot she was put in, and numerous other female athletes within the history of the Olympics, the less sense it made to me that Coubertin thought he was creating an environment free from politics. This doesn't make sense to me because his stance on women alone is a political one. In 1912, he stated that the games should only be for men. He didn't like the idea of women competing in general. He thought that female competitors tarnished athleticism as a whole. So I question his ideology in his vision of making this free from a political limitation when his attitude towards female competitors is so political. If we look at today's day and age and we consider the issue of equality for male and female athletes, it remains just that. It's still an issue. If we are comparing, for example, the U.S. men's national soccer team and the U.S. women's national soccer team, it is no comparison. The women have outperformed the men in specifically qualifying for the Olympics, international competition, wins, success rate, you name it. It has been no debate. The women have been more successful than the men. Players like Hope Solo have voiced their concerns that the gap in pay is relatively egregious. The pay is significantly lower for the female soccer player, despite the fact that the women's team has been much more successful than the men's team. Now, while it would be tough to pin this specific issue on Coubertin, in my opinion, it would be foolish not to think that the culture he helped perpetrate of disrespect towards female athletes, and even more specifically female Olympians, didn't play a major role in the issues women still face today and are currently fighting. As I think about issues that are still relevant today, it brings me back to the other major takeaway that I picked up on reading this book and studying the Olympics, and that would be the issue of race. Race in sports, race in everyday life, race in general. In American sports specifically, today, race is every bit as relevant as it has ever been. As I read more about the 1924 Parisian Olympics, I learned about something that, in my opinion, is not only a crown jewel of American history, but the history of athletics all around the world. And that moment in time was when William Hubbard became the first African American ever to win a gold medal in an Olympic event. That event was high jump. In his time, Hubbard went virtually unrecognized for his achievement. Very few people back home in America even knew about what he had done and what it meant for the history of sports. A major reason behind this can be chalked up to the fact that 100% of the media coverage on the story came from black media sources. Not one word was shared on any white media outlet about what Hubbard had done and what it meant for sports. If we fast forward to today's day and age, similarly to when we were looking at the issue of gender inequality, if we examine the role the media plays in coverage of athletic events and things pertaining to athletics, we can see that the news has a massive, massive impact on the sporting world. As we reflect on today's day and age and the role the media plays today, we have to consider how different it is with the emergence of social media. Although a massively positive and powerful tool, social media can have some very, very dangerous traits. A trend that is not very favorable in the social media era has been the emergence of the popular term fake news, which is in reference to the fact that articles can be produced on sites such as Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram that are not factually based. There are no reliable sources linked to the article that was produced. The importance of factual information is, in some instances, at an all-time low. If I'm going to take another example from American sports in general, we can look at Colin Kaepernick's situation in American football in the NFL. When Kaepernick first knelt in protest of the national anthem, he was shedding light on the fact that police brutality is a massive issue in America today, and the treatment of people of color is a worthy cause that needs to be talked about. However, social media has strewed this story in many different ways, and it has turned some of the coverage on Kaepernick's protest into Kaepernick kneeling because he hates the military, he hates first responders, he hates politicians, he hates police, all police officers. In today's day and age, the facts are not as important as what people call clickbait. And what that means is if there is a social media post that can get a lot of clicks based on the wording of its headline, that actually now is more important than what they're actually covering. So as we compare and contrast a Kaepernick to, let's say, Jesse Owens, who had a great performance in the famously controversial 1936 Germany Olympics, where he won 4 gold medals, a massively successful performance. When Jesse Owens won his gold, there was not one single news outlet below the geographical Mason-Dixon line that even reported it happened, which was a travesty in the history of athletics. And as we compare that today in the social media age, an equally dangerous thing is, instead of things not being reported, like in the time of Jesse Owens, there are, in fact, false stories being reported. And in my opinion, that is just as bad, if not worse, and a confusing time to be on the receiving end of some media coverage. I appreciated reading the games because it made me think. It made me think not only about the issues that past athletes have faced, but the issues still being faced today and maybe faced in the future. It made me reflect on the current connotation of what it means to watch the Olympics and experience the Olympic Games today. And although typically one can picture cultural diversity, a celebration of nations around the world, a celebration of athletics, a celebration of both men, women, black, white, brown, I learned that this was not always the case, and realistically, for the majority of the Olympic Games, it was white male athletes who had a platform to succeed. I think this book sets me up beautifully for the next course reading, which will be about American football, which I've already drawn parallels to reading this book. I think that some of the issues that international athletes have faced involve the media, which they still do today. They involve race relations, which they still do today. And they involve gender inequality, which they still do today. Every time I read a book that makes me think, I'm grateful. I'm a little bit different for it in a good way after reading the book. And I appreciate what I've learned. And I think the games has taught me a lot, not only about the history of the Olympics, but what sports can mean in a completely different level than what I had thought about before.